What is up? I'm Coach Squires, and this is Point Blank. This is going to be an ongoing podcast. I'm going to try to do at least 1 to 2 a week. Next week, I'm going to actually be having a guest on, but the whole purpose of this podcast is to debunk some myths around training, not so much debunking, but just create clarity around training, whether it's performance for athletes, whether it's building muscle strength, improving stability, anything that's performance and fitness related. So you don't have to necessarily be an athlete to take a lot from this. A lot of the different approaches that I use, you can apply to different goals and everything like that. But the whole point of the name to Point Blank is that I'm just going to shoot from the hip. I'm going to be very straightforward. This is a unique type of podcast because, again, I'm doing this live. I will repost it on my YouTube, which is Squires Fitness. And then I also, too, will be posting just an audio link that you can listen to later, which I'll be sharing on all of my platforms as well too. So we're going to kind of just dive right into this. I'm just going to kind of go right in. The first thing I want to talk about too, again, is just also to who I am as a coach. I think it's important to understand where I come from, my background, so you can understand my approach with everything. Okay. I've been an athlete my entire life. And part of me being an athlete, I wanted to play professional sports. So I was very much involved in fitness and health. I started literally working out at 13, 14 years old. I would go down the street. I would actually work out in my friend's apartment's gym because I couldn't get into normal gyms back then. Also too, I couldn't afford to get in one at 13, 14. And, I started messing around with weights because I was a smaller guy. I still am today, so my only leverage to being better than other athletes was to get stronger, was to get faster. I fell in love with bodybuilding early. So building muscle was also highly important to me. I love the aesthetic appeal. And, I knew that nutrition and also to fitness was the only way that I was going to leverage myself to possibly play professionally long term. And one of the things I've always had a passion for is helping people. Not necessarily that I came from a bad background. Most of my life, I did grow up in like kind of the middle class and stuff. But I had a life where I just kind of juggled back and forth. Had a mom that wasn't necessarily, she was a great mom, but, didn't make the best choices. So I was around certain things that it made me want to help people, right? I saw my mom struggle. And so I always wanted to help other people with what I did. And that was one of the things that becoming a professional athlete was going to allow me to do, was it was going to give me an outlet to actually help people. Even though I did want to, do all the things and just live that lifestyle. One of the things I've always wanted to do was help people. And I've always wanted to train either other athletes or other people because I saw tremendous benefits in my own life, right? So I am very passionate about doing things correctly, about doing things about optimizing our time. One thing about being an athlete is that you have to train a lot of different qualities, right? And you're doing this on top of your normal life. So I've always been from a process or from a approach of more of like, I want to take the minimal effective dose. And I apply that to my training. I apply that to my clients' training, whether, again, you're a weight loss client, whether you're building muscle, building strength, whether you're trying to become faster, more explosive for your sport, play at the collegiate or professional levels. I'm trying to give you the minimal effective dose always. That's why I have a strong passion about not doing certain things and doing certain things. And not trying to waste my clients' time, right? Like if you ever follow me on my social platforms, you'll realize that there's a lot of things that I suggest not doing. And the simple fact is that not only athletes, but as adults, we have a limited amount of time to get things done. We have professional careers that are demanding. A lot of us have families, or we have our personal life that we want to go have fun and enjoy. Most of us can't spend 2 to 3 hours in a gym 4 to 5 days or even 6 days a week. Some of us are fortunate to make time for that. But again, a lot of us are in there for 60 minutes, maybe 3 or 4 times, and we need to be effective with that time, right? And then athletes, they gotta, train different skills on top of that, not only just get stronger and more explosive, but they gotta speed train, they gotta skill train. There's a lot that goes into this. So I think it's also highly important to really be effective with that time. And also too, just from an injury preventive standpoint, we have to understand that most injuries are not only freak accidents, of course, but also too related to overuse. A lot of us do too much, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to work hard, but we need to work hard and put our focus in the areas that are going to be most effective for us and give us the highest return. So a lot of Point Blank is going to be just about that, right? Is going to be about, talking about the most effective ways to do things. I'm going to get a bunch of different people on here. Next week, I'm already going to bring on a local QB coach. I plan on, bringing on the local trainers and stuff, and then just anybody online that I want to connect with and have them share their background, their profession, and also to their expertise in whatever field it is. And again, it's all going to be related to various things, right? And everybody that's hopping on here, if you do have questions at any point, write them in the the chat box, and then at the end I'll answer those questions at the live Q&A, and then if anything I'll unmute you guys if you guys want to talk and stuff and have kind of open discussion. But this is going to be kind of rifled through. I'm going to be pretty quick with it. So we got to know me, point blank. We understand that it's just trying to save people time, right? I'm trying to give you the most effective way to achieve whatever result it is, whether it's athletic performance, whether you're just fitness in general, weight loss, muscle building, strength, and then also to if you're a coach, right, you're going to learn a lot over the next few weeks and weeks to come about ways that you can coach better, right? And maybe some things that you're doing with your clients or with your athletes that you're essentially wasting their time with, right? So the big thing we're going to be talking about today is stretching. And I think a lot of people, once you kind of see the way that I approach it and understand what stretching actually is, you're going to realize that it really doesn't benefit a lot of our clients and athletes, especially if they're active people, which I'll get to in a moment, right? So the whole point of what I named this is what space travel taught me about tissue. So I'm talking about muscle tissue, tendon, ligaments. These are all tissue, and even bone density, right? So I was listening to a podcast, actually, another one, and there was an astronaut on there, right? And he spent about 30 days in space. He was up on the space station, and he talked about coming back into the atmosphere and everything, about how he was weaker, right? His joints were looser and everything. And the reason why is because in space, there's literally little to no gravity. Okay. There's no stress on the body. So bone density begins to deteriorate, muscles begin to deteriorate, tendons and ligaments, they begin to deteriorate over time. Right? They break down because there's no stress acting upon them anymore, right? So what this reminded me was that we need stress in order for the body to respond. So it's important to work out and do resistance training because from a structural standpoint, right? The only reason why we have all the things we have is because of gravity. Okay. So the reason why we have bones, tendons, ligaments, right? It's not just because that's how we're made up. If we were in a different environment with less gravity, we probably wouldn't be the same structure that we are now. Okay. So that's always something to think about. Right. And then the main thing it taught me though, was that our muscles are always active. There is never a moment when they're turned off. The whole idea that muscles turn on and off is ridiculous. You sitting wherever you are, me sitting where I am right now, my muscles are actively working to keep me upright, right? My bones are actively being stressed by gravity, tendons, ligaments, everything is constantly stressed. Even me sitting in an elevated chair as I am right now, right? Everything is active, okay? So this kind of brings us into that whole stretching deal, right? So when we start thinking about stretching, okay, so look at my arms, right? Right now, my muscle is contracted and now it's stretched. Okay. If I want to apply more stretch, I can go here, right? But again, that's even just more for my forearm. It's not really going to get much more of a bicep stretch. And what I'm pointing out here is that if our muscles are always active and movement always means there's stretching, that means everything that we do involves stretching. Okay. Whether you're curling and extending with weight, right? That's stretching the muscle, contracting the muscle. Okay. And then when we think about muscles, there's literally thousands of muscle fibers along the whole thing. Okay. So when you're stretching, it's not like you're just stretching just the bicep. You're stretching every muscle fiber throughout that. Okay. And then you also have to think about when you stretch, you're only working from one way. You're working from an eccentric loading. So you're lengthening, right? But the muscles need to contract. And what research actually shows us that is that the muscle's ability to stretch is often limited by its ability to contract. Because like if you've noticed, when you go to stretch, you have to sit in a stretch for 30 to 60 seconds or longer to fully stretch the muscle. The reason why is because when there's forces acting upon that muscle, the muscle is fighting you, okay? Because it doesn't want you to tear the muscle fibers, right? It's not just going to let you lengthen out because again, that's going to put you at risk for injury, okay? So so when you start thinking of this, right? So everything is a stretch. Another way to think about this is also too, is that everything is a form of exercise. Stretching is a form of exercise with minimal loading. Okay. So you have to start asking yourself, what am I going to get the most bang for my buck? Right. And there's even research coming out now that's showing that you could be just as flexible stretching as you can lifting weights if you're choosing the right movements, right? The proper exercise selection, and you're working through the full range of motion. Okay. Now, one thing to also understand this too, like if you have goals of building muscle, improving strength, right? You don't need to be flexible, so to speak. You need to have some mobility, but that's different than flexibility. Flexibility is a passive measurement, meaning it's me just sitting here like seeing how long can I lengthen that, right? The moment I put a dumbbell in my hand and go to let it go, right? We've experienced this where you can't go any further or else the arm just goes, right? Because again, you don't have the mobility, right? You don't have the range of motion. So it's important to understand too that when we approach these things from a flexibility standpoint, what's going to give you the most bang for your buck? Is it going to be you sitting there for 30 to 60 seconds, pulling on a muscle in one direction? Or is it going to be a weighted movement that's going to help you lengthen, give you the same stretch, but also work that contraction? Because as we heard earlier, again, often the limits of a muscle's flexibility is going to be limited by its ability to contract, right? How strong that muscle is. Because again, our body doesn't want us to get hurt. Okay. And like I said, unless you have a sport that demands flexibility past a certain point, like say you have to do the splits for gymnastics or something, then you might want to incorporate some stretching, right? But there's still, if you have proper exercise selection and you're putting yourself in movements like that demand that flexibility, over time, it's going to happen. Okay. One thing that reinforced this for me, at least, was say for like my hips, right? Because I wasn't sprinting for a long time after I stopped playing sports, my hips weren't as mobile, so to speak, but the moment I started sprinting, now I can comfortably lift my knee up and tie my shoes, right? You'll notice a lot of us adults, when you go to lift that knee up, it gets tight now. Yeah, some of us got the little gut in the area, but like someone like me, I don't really got a gut, right? So, but I was like, man, this is hard to tie my shoes. I had to like bring my leg over to tie my shoe. But because I started sprinting, okay, I improved that mobility because the demands of what I was doing called for that, right? So when we're thinking about tissue, okay, there's two forms of loading that we have to consider, all right? There's force and then there's a velocity component, right? So velocity is meaning just that's a type of force, essentially. It's a type of loading. It's about how fast you can contract or stretch that muscle, right? So like if you're falling, right, you need the skill of it being able to lengthen fast, or else that puts you at risk for injury and your muscle might contract on you to try to protect, right? So it's important to stress the muscle not only from a resistance training standpoint, but you also need a velocity standpoint. This is why plyometrics has become so popular. And quite frankly, no matter your goal, if stability is important to you, you need to stress the body from both ways. Okay. So that's why even just working on landing is super important, right? Being able to let the muscles lengthen and then stop contraction right away, because that's falling, right? So if I fall, I need to be able to stop myself right away. So if you don't have the ability to contract, you're going to stumble. Okay. So there's a lot of things that go into that. Also to, when is it even proper to actually stretch that's going to benefit somebody, right? If you're coming off injury, it's, again, let's think of it as a form of exercise. If you're coming off injury, right, it's a way to put minimal loading safely onto a muscle, right? As long as you're not, being aggressive and just fucking ripping on the muscle, like it's going to be okay. Right. So like I always suggest stretching for like, say, somebody that's coming off injury, because you get to test the muscle in a safe manner. You can progressively load it. Right. You don't have to put 20 pounds in your hands and be like, let's take this bicep for a ride. Like, no, you can actually progressively stretch it. Or say like you pulled a hamstring, you can stretch it to see like, oh, how well is it doing? Can it manage that? Okay, it feels fine. Let's load it up now. Right. And even like a lot of things that we use that measure flexibility, it measures more than one thing. Like even in the sit and reach, right? Your limitation on a sit and reach, it's not even so much hamstring. It could be your hips, it could be your low back, there can be a lot of limiting factors. It could be also to your glutes, your hips up front. So if they can't contract well, because again, there's two forces always acting upon flexibility. There's the muscle you're pulling on, and then there's the antagonist muscle that you're actually contracting. Okay. So that's why, like, say where I say like tying my shoes, bringing my knees in, right? Part of that is my glute flexibility. Do I have enough flexibility through my glutes to lift up my knee? And do I have the strength in my hip to lift my knee? But a lot of people just think, oh, I can't lift my knee. It must be a hip issue. Well, if you don't have the flexibility or mobility within the glutes themselves, then that knee won't be raised. And I should say mobility. It's not technically flexibility, okay? Because mobility is flexibility under tension, right? It's a range of motion of a joint. So again, that joint's range of motion is going to change depending on the loading that's acting upon it, right? We see this with our squats, not being able to hit the same depth as you go heavier because the muscle is not strong enough to lengthen. So it's not going to allow that to happen. So compensations begin to happen, right? So that's why we have to understand that mobility involves strength just as much as it does flexibility, okay? And being able to pull on a muscle with minimal loading doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make it any safer once you do load it up, right? This is a big misconception. So again, like just to recircle back on like stretching again, it's like it's a form of exercise that offers little benefits, right? Offers a little bit of loading. As we know through all the research, flexibility does not decrease your chance of injury. There's chances it can put you at greater risk for injury because you're improving stretch tolerance, meaning that you can get access to movements that you're not strong enough for, right? So there's some risk there. Tension is good, right? So the reason why a lot of us too get tightness is a lot of times due, for one, it could be a stress response. It could be the way you're eating, the way you're not sleeping. Also too, if we do have certain tight areas, it could be basically the demands of your life, right? So like say you sit down a lot, you have tighter hips, tighter hamstrings. That's to be so that you feel more comfortable in that seated position, right? So if you don't put any other demands on those muscles to lengthen, whether it's through your exercise selection or whatever, then those tightnesses are going to occur. And that's to benefit you, right? We see this also too from a postural standpoint. Okay. So like, just because like say somebody's neck's forward, you know, you'll get a lot of people that are on computers where their neck starts coming forwards. I think it's called kyphosis or whatever. Don't quote me on that. But again, that's a position because they're on the computer and this is what's comfortable, right? So over time they develop that because that's the position they're in, and the body wants to be supported in that position. So it creates tightness in those areas so that you don't have to overstress on your neck being forward while you're on a computer, right? And also too, it's like one thing to understand with all this, with like the flexibility stuff, right? If you're not doing anything else, sure, it might be okay, right? But again, if you have any other demand on your life or any other stress on your life, it's not preparing you for anything. Okay. So that's why we always got to think of everything is a stretch. And also the same token, everything is an exercise, including stretching. So what's that exercise preparing you for? Right. And when we think of it from an exercise standpoint, we have to consider loading. Okay. Something in the sports realm that we talk about is called speed reserve. Okay. This is the same thing. I like to think of strength reserve as the same thing. So speed reserve means like if a game's if I can run 20 miles per hour, but the game's played at like 14, 15 miles per hour, say the top speed the game reaches is 17 miles per hour. That means I got 3 miles per hour in the tank that I never have to use, meaning that I'm in a safe space, not to get hurt. I don't have to use as much energy. It's the same thing with strength training. It's the same thing when preparing our body for any type of force that we have to manage in our life, whether it's picking things up, whether it's keeping us from falling and stumbling on our face, right? Having more strength makes these things easier for us to manage, right? So that's why it's important to get stronger. That's why we see so many benefits from resistance training and growing muscle, right? And that's not even from the health standpoint. That's just from a safety standpoint, right? So we think of growing muscle, improving muscle functionality and stuff. Okay, muscles help us circulate blood. Okay, Stretching doesn't build muscle. You can get some stretch mediated hypertrophy, but it's minimal. And the studies that do show that, it's insane amount of stretching. If you spent the same time lifting weights, you'd get way higher return, get flexibility, and you'd get muscle growth. You'd get strength. So you improve stability. You're going to improve mobility. You're going to improve all these other things, where stretching just improves flexibility. So I hope that kind of clears things up. I know I went through a lot of different things there. But like from a safety standpoint, you're going to benefit your clients, yourself, a lot more by focusing on strength training. And to challenge yourself, you have to think, okay, if I have limited flexibility in this point, right? Say you do have your hamstrings or whatever, find exercises that challenge the exercise and work through a greater range of motion. Think of it this way, that weight and loading is going to help me lengthen more. Okay. At the same token, when you're pulling on a muscle, it tries to contract to keep you from lengthening. If a muscle can't manage so much loading, it's going to let that flexibility happen, because if it can't contract well enough, it's going to allow that flexibility to happen again too. So there's just ways that we have to reapproach and reframe our way of thinking of things, right? And because our clients, or say an athlete, is experiencing tightness, sometimes it has nothing to do with their flexibility. Sometimes they're just under stress, they're overtraining. The first things I would ask about is, what's the recovery like? And then also too, I would ask about what's their volume like, right? Because those two things are going to have a greater stress on tightness than, say, their flexibility, right? Just because there's tightness, and I've said this in the past and I've been totally wrong, it doesn't mean there's weakness, right? Now, strengthening and focusing in the areas around it can help, right? Just like focusing on the antagonist muscle. If you have limited flexibility in your hamstrings, improving mobility or the flexibility within your quads and strengthening those quads can help, right? Same thing with your hips, improving your hips, improving your glutes, it can help. It can alleviate some things, right? But it doesn't mean that because there's tightness in the hamstring that I need to pull on the hamstring, right? It could be a lot of other things. It could be just their lifestyle. So there's ways we need to reframe our thinking around the whole stretching thing. It doesn't warm us up. Okay. It's a horrible way to warm us up, to be honest with you. From a performance standpoint, if you're stretching before, whether it's pitching, lifting, anything else, what happens is basically the muscle becomes relaxed. It puts it, I believe it's called a parasympathetic state. Don't quote me on that. Look it up if you need to. But it puts you in a relaxed state, right? So it takes from actually performance when you stretch before doing things, right? That's not the way to go about it. You need to warm the body up. That means go do some cardio or perform the movement you're going to do at a significantly lighter load and progressively load it up, and slowly warm up that way. It's going to be highly more effective. You're going to maintain outputs. If anything, you're going to perform better, right? From injury prevention, right? Flexibility does nothing for injury prevention. Strength training will, because it helps with stability, right? Another way to think of stability is strength. Yes, you do need the skill set of being able to manage your body in space, improving proprioception, so knowing where your body is in space. But again, flexibility does not decrease your chance of injury whatsoever. It does not do anything for recovery either. And we need to get away from calling stretching recovery. It does nothing of the sort, right? You could get the same relaxation from laying on the ground and closing your eyes for about 5 minutes, right? And just breathing in through your nose, exhaling through your mouth. You're going to get the same effects as far as putting yourself in a parasympathetic state and helping you relax more. Okay. So again, we need to get away from these things that are misleading to people. Not only are they confusing for ourselves, but they also are confusing for our clients, for our athletes. And it's a lot of wasted time, to be honest. If they're not sedentary, if they're not coming off injury, probably should cut it out. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and let me know. That's the main gist of what we're talking about today. Let me pull this up real quick. So the next few things we're going to be talking about over the next few podcasts. Let me get this up for us. Where is it? No, that's not it. Let's see here. So the next one, we're going to be talking about building strength and muscle while staying injury free. So giving things around rep ranges, around intensity, and around actual volume. So it's something that I feel a lot of people get confused with, is that there's two things at play here. You know, we always have volume, we always have intensity. So those are the two things we got to be considerate of. Also, too, just clearing some things up for hypertrophy. I think it's super important. And honest truth is, if you do both of these correctly, you're going to be injury free. And I think there's a lot of nuance to, especially like hypertrophy. You know, strength training is pretty straightforward, but hypertrophy, it really just depends on your preferred approach. There's pros and cons to both. I kind of made a post about it recently. And next Thursday I have one called Training Champions. I'm going to be bringing on my good friend TJ. He's a local QB coach. We actually competed against each other in high school. He ended up going to college, being a quarterback, and he's a local coach now for the high schools and stuff, and just a solid ass dude. And his focus is not only just helping kids, he does his own thing on the side with QBs and stuff, but it's also about helping these young men develop. So that one's going to be really good, because we're going to be talking about mindset, about just, not only preparing these athletes for their sport, but also for life. And then after that, I'm going to go into like how to find a great coach. I think a lot of us get jaded by trainers. We get jaded by coaches because we have a bad experience. And I also think that starts with the fact is we don't know how to go about finding the best coach or trainer for ourselves. So I want to give people some tools around that, to help them out with that. And then the next one after that, at least for the first 5, is going to be talking about speed development and why this should be top of mind for athletes and why it should be their main focus. So that one is a little more geared towards athletes and everything. But if there is any like specific guests you guys like me to have on, make sure to comment below whether you're seeing this on Facebook. If you're hearing this through, I'm gonna eventually get this on Apple and Spotify and stuff. But if you're hearing this through one of those platforms, just go on my social media platforms. I'm Coach Squires on TikTok, Coach_Squires on TikTok and Instagram. And then Squires Fitness is my YouTube channel. And then I'll share the other channels once those get all launched up. It'll be under obviously Point Blank with Coach Squires. But I definitely want to get more guests on here. I want to get different viewpoints, and just different, experiences and everything outside myself. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, I know only 2 of us hopped on here today. If you guys have any questions, throw them in the chat. If not, I'll probably be hopping off here in the next few minutes. I really appreciate you all joining in. And I definitely plan to do more of these. And I hope you guys took a lot from, the things I talked about today. And I hope that I created a little bit of clarity around why I keep saying stretching is a waste of time. And when I say that, I mean for an active community. If you are active, working out, proper exercise selection and everything else is going to allow this, that flexibility to happen. Again, there's totally studies out that support everything I'm talking about right now, that people are getting just as much flexibility from strength training as they are now from actual focus stretching and everything. But yeah, so doesn't look like there's any questions, I'm assuming. So I really appreciate you all being on. And then I will be posting up when the next one is going to be going up. I'm going to be taking this recording. I'm going to be throwing it up on YouTube. And then once I figure out, I think I gotta go through Buzzsprout and do all that other stuff. And then I'll get it so you can listen to just the audio and everything. But remember, space travel, it's going to help us understand tissue and stuff. So, all right, guys, thank you for hopping on. I appreciate you both, Maria and Steve, for hopping on. I will catch you all later. Adios.